When my grandmother passed away last month, I expected grief, memories, maybe some family drama over her antique china collection. What I didn't expect was to discover that everything, her sprawling Victorian house in Salem, Oregon, her savings, her investments, even her beloved 1967 Mustang, would go to my cousin Rebecca. Not me, not my brother, not even split among the grandchildren. Just Rebecca. And when the lawyer read her final letter explaining why, the words still echo in my head. Rebecca deserves it more than anyone else in this family. But the real shock? That wasn't even the biggest revelation. Because 3 weeks later, when Rebecca finally got the keys to Grandma's house, what we found hidden in the basement changed everything we thought we knew about our family. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Marcus Thompson, and up until 6 weeks ago, I thought I knew my grandmother Eleanor Thompson better than anyone. She raised me and my brother Kyle after our parents died in a car accident when I was 12. For 15 years, that old Victorian house on Maple Street was home. Grandma Eleanor was the kind of woman who made pancakes every Sunday morning, who taught me how to change a tire and balance a checkbook, who never missed one of my baseball games, even when her arthritis was acting up. She was also incredibly particular about money. Every penny had its place, every expense was carefully considered. She clipped coupons religiously, bought generic brands, and somehow managed to save enough working as a school librarian to put both Kyle and me through college without a single student loan. When she passed away at 84 from a sudden heart attack, Kyle and I naturally assumed we'd inherit her modest estate and probably spend months sorting through decades of accumulated belongings. The reading of the will took place on a gray Tuesday morning at the offices of Morrison & Associates downtown. Kyle and I sat in uncomfortable leather chairs across from Mr. Morrison, who'd been handling Grandma's legal affairs for 20 years. Also present was our cousin Rebecca Martinez, my Uncle Tony's daughter from California. Rebecca had always been the family outlier. While Kyle and I grew up in Oregon with Grandma practically raising us, Rebecca lived 3 states away and visited maybe once every few years for major holidays. She was 32, worked in marketing for some tech company in San Diego, and had this way of making every conversation about her latest vacation or career achievement. Don't get me wrong, Rebecca wasn't a bad person, but she'd never been particularly close to Grandma Eleanor. At family gatherings, she'd spend most of her time on her phone or talking about how much she missed California weather. Mr. Morrison cleared his throat and began reading. The language was formal and legal, but the message was crystal clear. Eleanor Thompson's entire estate, valued at approximately $400,000, including the house, savings, investments, and personal property, was being left entirely to Rebecca Martinez. Kyle and I would each receive $5,000 and our choice of one personal memento. The silence in that room was deafening. Kyle's face went completely pale. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. But Rebecca? She looked just as shocked as we were, maybe more so. "There must be some mistake," Kyle finally managed to say. Mr. Morrison shook his head and continued reading from a sealed letter Grandma had written to accompany the will. Her handwriting, unmistakable even typed up by Morrison's secretary, explained her reasoning. "I know this decision will come as a surprise to my beloved grandsons, Marcus and Kyle. Please understand that this choice comes from a place of love and careful consideration. Rebecca deserves this more than anyone else in this family, for reasons that will become clear in time. She has carried a burden that none of you know about, and this inheritance is both my gift and my apology to her." Rebecca was crying by the time the letter finished. Not tears of joy, but something deeper, more complicated. She kept shaking her head and saying she didn't understand, that she never expected anything like this. Walking out of that law office, I felt completely unmoored. 15 years of believing I was the favored grandson, of thinking I understood my place in Grandma's life, had been shattered in 30 minutes. Kyle was furious, talking about contesting the will, demanding to know what burden Rebecca could possibly have carried that we didn't know about. But looking at Rebecca's tear-streaked face, her genuine confusion and distress, I could tell she was just as blindsided as we were.
The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of awkward family phone calls and tense conversations. Uncle Tony flew up from Sacramento, completely baffled by his mother-in-law's decision. Rebecca's mom, Aunt Carmen, kept apologizing even though none of this was her fault. Kyle hired a lawyer to explore contesting the will, but Eleanor's mental state had been thoroughly documented as sound, and the will was ironclad. Rebecca, meanwhile, seemed almost paralyzed by the inheritance. She took time off work and stayed at a hotel downtown rather than moving into the house right away. Every conversation with her was stilted and uncomfortable. She kept insisting she'd share everything, that this wasn't what she wanted, but Kyle wasn't buying it, and honestly, neither was I at first. 3 weeks after the reading, Rebecca finally decided it was time to go through the house. She asked if Kyle and I wanted to help, partly out of courtesy, but mostly because the task felt overwhelming for one person. The house was filled with 8 decades of life, photograph albums, china collections, books, furniture, clothes, and countless boxes of items Grandma had never been able to throw away.
We started in the attic on a Saturday morning. Rebecca had brought coffee and donuts, clearly trying to make the situation less awkward. As we sorted through boxes of Christmas decorations and old-school papers, she kept apologizing, kept saying she wished she understood why Grandma had made this choice. Kyle remained coldly polite, but I found myself beginning to believe that Rebecca genuinely hadn't known about the inheritance beforehand. By afternoon, we'd worked our way through most of the main floor and were ready to tackle the basement. Grandma's basement had always been off-limits when Kyle and I were kids. She claimed it was just storage and too dangerous for children, with all the old tools and electrical equipment down there. As adults, we'd never had any reason to explore it. Rebecca found the key hanging on a small hook behind the water heater. The basement door was solid oak, much heavier and more substantial than you'd expect for a simple storage area. When she turned the key and we flipped on the lights, I expected to see the usual basement clutter: old furniture, holiday decorations, maybe some of Grandpa's tools from before he passed away. Instead, we found something that stopped all 3 of us dead in our tracks. The basement wasn't a storage area at all. It was a workshop, but not the kind you'd expect to find in an elderly librarian's house. Professional-grade equipment lined the walls: engraving machines, metal presses, high-end printers, and chemical baths. The air smelled of ink and metal polish. Work tables displayed tools I couldn't even identify, alongside magnifying lamps and precision instruments that looked expensive and well-maintained. But it was the far wall that made my blood run cold. Hundreds of documents were pinned to corkboards with military precision. Birth certificates, social security cards, driver's licenses, passports, all bearing different names, different faces, but with one common thread. Every single identity document was a fake, and most of them featured photos of people I recognized from old family albums. Rebecca picked up a passport from the nearest table. The photo showed a woman in her 50s with dark hair and kind eyes. The name read Maria Santos, but the face was unmistakably our grandmother, just 20 years younger. Kyle grabbed another document, a birth certificate for someone named David Chen, but the details matched exactly with our grandfather's information, just with an Asian surname instead of Thompson. "What the hell was Grandma doing down here?" Kyle whispered, his voice barely audible. I moved toward a filing cabinet that stood slightly open. Inside, meticulously organized folders contained what appeared to be case files. Each folder had a name, a photograph, and detailed notes in Grandma's precise handwriting. The first file I opened made my hands shake. It belonged to a woman named Jennifer Walsh from Portland. The notes described her as a victim of domestic violence whose ex-husband had violated multiple restraining orders. Grandma's notes tracked the husband's behavior patterns, his work schedule, his drinking habits. The final entry, dated 3 years ago, simply read, "New identity completed. Jennifer relocated to Denver. Case closed." Rebecca was reading over my shoulder. "She was helping people disappear," she said, her voice filled with amazement rather than horror. "Look at this." She handed me another file. This one belonged to a teenage boy named Miguel Torres.
The notes described him as an undocumented immigrant whose parents had been deported, leaving him alone and vulnerable. Grandma had created a complete identity package for him, including school records that would allow him to finish high school and apply for college. Her final note read, Miguel now attending Oregon State University under new identity, full scholarship secured. File after file revealed the same pattern. Abused women fleeing dangerous relationships, LGBTQ teenagers kicked out by their families, undocumented immigrants facing deportation, political refugees who'd fallen through cracks in the asylum system. Each file represented someone whose life Grandma had completely transformed through her underground network. There must be over 200 files here, Kyle said, his anger from earlier completely replaced by bewilderment. How long was she doing this? A leather-bound journal on the main work table held the answer. Grandma's records showed she'd been running this operation for nearly 30 years, ever since Grandpa died. Her first case had been a woman from her church whose husband had put her in the hospital twice. When the legal system failed to protect her, Grandma had taken matters into her own hands. What started as a one-time favor had evolved into a sophisticated network. Grandma had contacts at various government offices who provided blank documents. She had photographers who specialized in realistic identification photos. She even had a retired police officer who helped create believable backstories that would pass basic background checks. But the most shocking revelation came when Rebecca found a small wooden box tucked behind the chemical baths. Inside were dozens of letters, thank you notes from people whose lives Grandma had saved. A woman in Texas wrote about finally being able to sleep without fear. A young man in Colorado described graduating college and becoming a teacher. A transgender teenager in Florida thanked Grandma for giving her the chance to live authentically. She saved all of these, Rebecca said, tears flowing freely now. At the bottom of the box was an envelope marked for Rebecca. Inside, Grandma's final letter to her explained everything.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. My dearest Rebecca, if you're reading this, it means you've discovered my life's work. I know this comes as a shock, but I need you to understand why I've left everything to you. 28 years ago, when you were 4 years old, your mother brought you to me in the middle of the night. She was fleeing your father, Tony's brother, Miguel, who had been abusing both of you. Carmen was terrified, penniless, and desperate to protect you from a man who had threatened to kill you both if she ever left him. I created new identities for you and your mother that night. Rebecca Martinez was born in my basement, along with Carmen Martinez. Your original names were Rosa and Isabella Gutierrez. I helped your mother build a new life in California, far enough from Miguel that he could never find you. Tony knew the truth. That's why he married Carmen despite her reluctance to discuss her past. He's been protecting my secret all these years. The burden you've carried, though you may not have realized it, is the weight of being someone you weren't born to be. The inheritance isn't just money, Rebecca. It's an apology for the childhood trauma you endured, and it's a responsibility. This network has helped over 800 people over the years. They depend on someone continuing this work. I believe you have the strength, the compassion, and the organizational skills to carry on what I started. The choice is yours, but remember, sometimes the law isn't enough to protect innocent people. Sometimes mercy requires breaking a few rules. The letter went on to provide detailed instructions about the network, including contact information for her key associates and a Swiss bank account containing another $200,000 specifically for funding new identities. Kyle and I stood in stunned silence as Rebecca finished reading the letter aloud. Our grandmother, the woman who taught us right from wrong, who'd never even let us jaywalk, had been running an illegal identity-changing operation for 3 decades. And our cousin, who we'd barely known, was actually a completely different person than we'd thought. "So you're not really Rebecca Martinez," I finally said. She shook her head. "I guess I'm Rosa Gutierrez. Though honestly, I don't remember much from before I was 4. Rebecca Martinez is the only identity I've ever known."
Kyle picked up another file and flipped through it absently. This explains so much about Grandma. The way she was always so careful about money, so private about certain things. The locked basement, the occasional mysterious phone calls. And why does she leave everything to you? I added, looking at Rebecca, or Rosa, with new understanding. She didn't just save your life once, she gave you an entirely new life. Rebecca was staring at the equipment around us, clearly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she'd inherited. I don't know the first thing about any of this. I work in marketing, for crying out loud. How am I supposed to help people disappear? But even as she said it, I could see something changing in her expression. The thank you letters were still scattered on the table, and she kept glancing at them. Each one represented a life saved, a person who'd found safety because of Grandma's Underground Railroad. Maybe you don't have to decide right now, I suggested. But these files, some of these people might still need help. And according to this journal, Grandma had 3 new cases she was working on when she passed away. Rebecca picked up the journal and read the final entries. 3 people had reached out in the weeks before Grandma's death, all desperate for new identities. Their cases were still pending, their lives still in danger. As we stood in that basement workshop, surrounded by the evidence of our grandma's secret life, I realized this inheritance wasn't just about money or property. Rebecca hadn't just inherited a house and bank account, she'd inherited the responsibility for an underground network that hundreds of people depended on for survival. The question now was whether she was ready to become the person Grandma believed she could be. The decision to continue Grandma's work wasn't made in that basement. It came 3 days later when Rebecca got a phone call that changed everything. We'd spent those 3 days in a strange limbo. Kyle had called off his lawyer and apologized for threatening to contest the will. I'd taken time off from my job at the accounting firm to help Rebecca sort through the overwhelming reality of what she'd inherited. We'd agreed to keep the basement discovery between the 3 of us until Rebecca could figure out her next move. Rebecca had been staying at the house, sleeping in Grandma's old room, and spending hours each night reading through case files, trying to understand the scope of the operation. She'd found detailed financial records showing how Grandma had funded everything, taking on freelance bookkeeping work, selling vintage items online, even running a small eBay business selling handmade crafts. Every extra dollar had gone toward helping people disappear. Then, on Wednesday evening, the phone rang. "Is this Eleanor Thompson?" a woman's voice asked, shaky and desperate. Rebecca hesitated for a moment before responding. "Eleanor isn't available anymore. Can I help you?" "My name is Ashley Chen. She was going to help me. I gave her $5,000 last month for new documents, but I haven't heard from her since. I really need those papers. My ex-husband found out where I work, and yesterday he showed up at my apartment. The restraining order isn't stopping him." Rebecca's hands were trembling as she looked through Grandma's final notes. Ashley Chen was one of the 3 pending cases. According to the file, Ashley had fled from Seattle after her ex-husband had nearly killed her during their divorce proceedings. He'd violated multiple restraining orders, had connections in law enforcement that made him nearly untouchable, and had sworn to track her down no matter where she went. "Ashley," Rebecca said carefully, "I need to ask you something important. Are you in immediate danger right now?" "I think so. Maybe. I don't know." Ashley's voice cracked. "He knows I'm in Portland now. A friend saw him asking questions at my old job yesterday. I'm staying at a motel, but I can't keep running without new identification. Eleanor promised she could help me start over completely." Rebecca looked at Kyle and me, panic clear in her eyes. This wasn't theoretical anymore. There was a real person on the phone whose life might depend on getting help that only existed in Grandma's basement workshop.
"Can you give me until tomorrow?" Rebecca asked. "I'll call you back at this number and let you know what we can do." After hanging up, Rebecca sank into Grandma's old armchair and put her head in her hands. "What am I supposed to do? I don't know how to make fake documents. I don't know how to help someone disappear. But if I don't do something, Ashley might end up dead." Kyle, who'd been skeptical about the whole operation, surprised me by speaking up first. Grandma kept detailed instructions for everything, and she had contacts who helped with the technical stuff. He was right.
Grandma's filing system included a Rolodex of associates, each with coded entries that described their role in the network. There was Photo Phil, who handled identification pictures, Paper Pete, who provided blank government forms, and Background Betty, who created believable personal histories for new identities. Maybe we could reach out to them, I suggested, explain the situation, see if they'd be willing to help one last time. Rebecca spent the rest of the evening studying Ashley's file and Grandma's procedural notes. The process was more complex than I'd imagined. Creating a convincing new identity required not just fake documents, but a complete backstory that could withstand scrutiny. Employment history, educational records, references, everything had to be meticulously crafted and cross-referenced. The next morning, Rebecca made her first call to Photo Phil, whose real name turned out to be Philip Rodriguez, a retired DMV photographer who'd been helping Grandma for 15 years. Eleanor passed away. His voice was genuinely sad. I'm sorry to hear that. She was a good woman who helped a lot of people. When Rebecca explained the situation with Ashley, Philip didn't hesitate. Eleanor would want us to finish what she started. Bring the girl to my studio tomorrow afternoon. I'll have everything ready. Similar conversations with Paper Pete and Background Betty yielded the same response. Grandma's network wasn't just professional relationships. These people had been her friends, united by a shared mission to help vulnerable people escape dangerous situations. Rebecca called Ashley back that evening with instructions to meet at a coffee shop downtown the next morning. When Ashley walked in, a thin woman in her late 20s with haunted eyes and nervous gestures, I could see why Grandma had taken her case. She looked like someone who'd been running for so long, she'd forgotten what safety felt like. "You're not Eleanor," Ashley said, studying Rebecca's face. "No, I'm her granddaughter. Eleanor passed away recently, but we're going to finish what she started for you." Ashley broke down crying right there in the coffee shop. I thought I was going to have to keep running forever. I've been sleeping with a knife under my pillow for 6 months. Over the next 4 days, Rebecca coordinated Ashley's transformation with the efficiency of someone who'd been doing this for years. Photo Phil created a new driver's license and passport. Paper Pete provided a birth certificate and social security card. Betty crafted an employment history that would allow Ashley to get a job in Denver, where she'd always wanted to live. The most challenging part was teaching Ashley how to be her new identity. Rebecca spent hours coaching her on details: her new birthday, her fictional hometown, the schools she'd supposedly attended. It was like watching someone rehearse for a role that would last the rest of their life. "The hardest part isn't remembering the facts," Ashley told Rebecca during one of their sessions. "It's learning to believe you deserve a fresh start." On Saturday morning, we drove Ashley to the train station. She had a new name, Jennifer Walsh, new documents, and enough money from Grandma's emergency fund to start over in Colorado. As the train pulled away, Rebecca stood on the platform crying. "That felt amazing," she said. "I've never done anything that mattered like that before." But the satisfaction was short-lived. That same evening, another desperate call came in. Then another. Word was somehow spreading that Eleanor's network might still be operational. Each caller had a story more heartbreaking than the last: a transgender teenager whose parents had thrown him out and threatened to kill him if he didn't fix himself, an undocumented woman whose abusive employer was threatening to have her deported if she reported his crimes. Rebecca found herself thrown into the deep end of Grandma's operation. Kyle and I tried to help, but we were amateurs fumbling through procedures that Grandma had refined over decades. Rebecca, meanwhile, seemed to have an intuitive understanding of what each person needed. She could listen to someone's story and immediately identify the key challenges they'd face in creating a new identity. "I think it's because I went through it myself," she told me, after successfully placing the transgender teenager with a family friend in San Francisco. "Even though I don't remember the trauma from when I was 4, some part of me understands what it feels like to need to become someone else to survive." 3 weeks after Ashley's departure, Rebecca had helped 6 people disappear. The basement workshop was running at full capacity, and Grandma's network of associates had seamlessly accepted Rebecca as their new coordinator. But the emotional toll was enormous.
Each case meant absorbing someone else's trauma, understanding their fear, and carrying the weight of their safety. I can't keep doing this alone, Rebecca admitted after a particularly difficult case involving a woman fleeing a human trafficking ring. Grandma had 30 years to build up to this level. I'm trying to match her output in 3 weeks, and it's killing me. That's when Kyle surprised us both with a proposal that would change everything. What if you didn't have to do it alone, he said. What if we made this a family business? Kyle's proposal to turn the operation into a family business wasn't just emotional support, it was strategic brilliance disguised as brotherly concern. Think about it, he said, pacing around Grandma's living room while Rebecca and I sat exhausted from another 18-hour day coordinating new identities. You're trying to do everything yourself: intake calls, case management, coordinating with contacts, financial planning, security protocols. Grandma had 30 years to slowly build her capacity. You're burning out in 3 weeks. He pulled out a legal pad covered with notes he'd apparently been making while watching Rebecca work. I've been analyzing the workflow. There are distinct specializations here that could be divided efficiently. Rebecca, you're naturally gifted at the psychological side, understanding what each person needs, helping them transition emotionally to their new identity. But you're wasting time on logistics that someone else could handle. Kyle had always been the analytical one in our family, the guy who could look at any system and immediately spot inefficiencies. After college, he'd gone into supply chain management for a manufacturing company and had a reputation for solving problems that other people couldn't even identify. What are you suggesting? Rebecca asked. Division of labor based on our actual skills. Marcus, you're a CPA. You understand financial systems, record keeping, regulatory compliance. You could handle the money side, funding operations, managing payments, maintaining financial security without leaving traces. I know logistics and operations. I could coordinate with the network contacts, schedule appointments, manage case timelines, handle supply chain issues. I had to admit, it made sense. Over the past 3 weeks, I'd watched Rebecca struggle with aspects of the operation that were basic accounting and project management tasks. Meanwhile, she'd shown an almost supernatural ability to connect with desperate people and guide them through identity transformation. But this is illegal, I pointed out. We're talking about document fraud, identity theft, conspiracy charges. Kyle, you have a career, a reputation. I have clients who trust me with their finances. If we get caught... We're already accessories, Kyle interrupted. We've been helping for 3 weeks. The legal jeopardy ship has sailed. The question now is whether we do this professionally or keep fumbling through it and risk getting everyone caught because we're disorganized. Rebecca had been quiet during our debate, but now she spoke up. There's something else to consider. I've been going through more of Grandma's records, and this operation is bigger than we realized. She wasn't just helping individual cases. She was connected to other networks in different cities, similar operations run by other people who'd gotten fed up with legal systems that couldn't protect vulnerable people. She showed us a map Grandma had drawn, marking cities across the country where allied networks operated. Portland, Seattle, Denver, Phoenix, Austin, Atlanta, dozens of locations where people like Grandma were running underground railroads for modern refugees. These networks coordinate with each other, Rebecca continued. When someone needs to disappear, they don't just get randomly relocated randomly. They get moved to specific cities where partner networks can provide ongoing support. It's like a witness protection program, but for people the official system won't protect. The scope was staggering. Grandma's operation wasn't an isolated hobby. It was part of a national infrastructure that had been quietly operating for decades. And according to her correspondence with other coordinators, the demand was growing every year. That settles it, Kyle said. If we're going to do this, we need to do it right. Half measures will get people killed. Over the next week, we restructured everything. Kyle created operational protocols that streamlined case management and reduced security risks. I set up financial systems that separated the network's funding from our personal accounts while maintaining complete anonymity. Rebecca focused on what she did best, counseling clients and managing their psychological transition to new identities.
The transformation was remarkable. Cases that had been taking Rebecca a week to complete were now finished in 3 days. Our first test came when we received a referral from the Seattle network, a family of 4 fleeing a domestic violence situation where the abuser was a police detective with connections throughout Washington state law enforcement. This is exactly the kind of case that requires network coordination, Rebecca explained as we reviewed the file. They can't just disappear locally. They need to be relocated somewhere the abuser's law enforcement contacts can't reach them, and they need ongoing support because they have 2 young children. Kyle coordinated with networks in 3 different cities to find the best placement. I arranged funding that would support the family for 6 months while they established their new life. Rebecca spent hours with the parents, helping them prepare their children for the identity change and teaching them techniques for maintaining their new personas. The family's transformation took 10 days from initial contact to successful relocation. When we received confirmation that they'd safely arrived in their new city and been connected with local support resources, I felt something I'd never experienced in 15 years of accounting: the satisfaction of work that actually mattered.
But success brought new challenges. Word of our efficient operations spread through the underground network, and referrals started pouring in. We went from handling 2 cases per week to 5, then 8. Kyle had to take a leave of absence from his job to manage the logistics. I started handling network finances full-time, officially retiring from my accounting practice. We've become the thing Grandma spent 30 years building, Rebecca observed after we successfully completed our 20th case. But instead of 1 person burning out slowly, we're 3 people burning out quickly. She was right. The emotional toll of constantly absorbing other people's trauma was enormous. Every case involved hearing stories of abuse, violence, persecution, and systemic failure. Kyle had started having nightmares about the people we couldn't help. I'd developed anxiety about money transfers and security protocols. Rebecca was drinking too much coffee and sleeping too little. The breaking point came during our most challenging case yet. A whistleblower named David Park had exposed corruption in a defense contracting company and was facing retaliation that included death threats and mysterious accidents involving other potential witnesses. His case required not just new identity documents, but complete physical transformation and relocation to a country without extradition treaties. "This is beyond our capabilities," I told Rebecca and Kyle during an emergency meeting. "We're talking about international document fraud, plastic surgery coordination, permanent relocation to a foreign country. If we screw this up, David Park dies. If we get caught, we all go to prison for decades." But Rebecca had already made contact with Grandma's most secretive ally, someone identified in her files only as the architect. This person apparently specialized in the most extreme cases, situations where people needed to completely cease existing in their current form. "The architect wants to meet with us," Rebecca said. "Tomorrow night, downtown, location to be determined. They've been watching our work for the past month and want to discuss expanding our capabilities." Kyle and I exchanged glances. We'd gone from discovering Grandma's secret basement to meeting with shadowy international identity specialists in less than 2 months. Each step felt like we were falling deeper into a world we'd never known existed. "Are we really ready for this?" Kyle asked. Rebecca looked at David Park's file, at the photos of bruises from his recent accident, at the letters from his daughter begging him to disappear before something worse happened to him. "I don't think we have a choice," she said. "People are depending on us now. We can either step up to meet that responsibility, or we can let them down, the way the legal system already has." That night, as we prepared for our meeting with the architect, I realized we'd crossed a line we couldn't cross. We weren't just continuing Grandma's work anymore, we were expanding it, professionalizing it, and committing ourselves to a life that existed completely outside the boundaries of conventional society. The question was whether we were ready for what came next. The architect turned out to be a 60-year-old woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, who ran a legitimate plastic surgery practice in downtown Portland. We met her at a 24-hour diner near the waterfront at midnight, chosen specifically because the late-night crowd of shift workers and insomniacs provided perfect cover for a conversation that couldn't happen anywhere else. Dr. Chen ordered black coffee and got straight to business. "Eleanor and I worked together for 12 years.
She handled domestic cases, people fleeing abuse, persecution, local dangers. I handled international situations, whistleblowers, political dissidents, people who needed to vanish completely from their former existence. She studied each of us carefully before continuing. Your grandmother never told you about me because she wanted to protect you from this level of exposure. But circumstances have changed. The demand for complete disappearance services has tripled in the past 5 years, and I can't handle the volume alone anymore. Dr. Chen pulled out a tablet and showed us case files that made our previous work look simple. A climate scientist whose research had threatened powerful energy companies, a journalist who'd uncovered human trafficking networks with government connections, a tech engineer who discovered his company was selling surveillance technology to authoritarian regimes. These people can't just get new social security numbers and move to Denver, she explained. They need surgical alteration, complete medical history reconstruction, international relocation, and ongoing security monitoring. The kind of transformation that makes their former self literally impossible to trace. The David Park case had been weighing on my mind for days. Every hour we delayed increased his risk of being permanently silenced. Looking at Dr. Chen's equipment and expertise, I could see a solution to his problem, but also a massive escalation in our involvement. What exactly are you proposing? Rebecca asked. Partnership. Your team has proven exceptionally efficient at the psychological and logistical aspects of identity transformation. I have the medical capabilities and international connections for physical transformation and permanent relocation. Together, we could offer complete disappearance services for the most vulnerable cases. Kyle leaned forward. What would that look like practically? Dr. Chen outlined a system that was breathtakingly comprehensive. Clients would undergo psychological evaluation with Rebecca to determine readiness for complete identity change. Kyle would coordinate logistics, including safe houses, transportation, and document preparation. I would manage finances, including offshore accounts and international money transfers. Dr. Chen would handle medical transformation and relocation to partner networks in countries with strong privacy protections. The financial investment would be substantial, she continued, establishing proper infrastructure, security systems, international accounts, but the funding sources are already in place. People who need our services often have significant resources: corporate whistleblowers with stock options, political dissidents with offshore accounts, journalists with book deals. They can afford to pay for premium disappearance services. The moral complexity was staggering. We'd gone from helping domestic abuse victims escape dangerous relationships to essentially offering witness protection services for people whose governments or corporations wanted them dead. The legal risks were exponentially higher, but so was the potential impact.
I need to think about David Park specifically, Rebecca said. He has a daughter in college. Complete disappearance would mean never seeing her again. Is there any middle ground option? Dr. Chen shook her head. Based on the intelligence I've gathered about his case, partial measures will get him killed within 6 months. His former company has contracts with 3 different intelligence agencies. They have resources that make local law enforcement look like mall security. If David Park is going to survive, David Park needs to cease existing. We spent the next 3 hours discussing operational details. Dr. Chen's setup was more sophisticated than anything I'd imagined. She had surgical facilities that weren't officially connected to her practice, partnerships with document specialists in 6 different countries, and safe houses from Vancouver to Mexico City. Your grandmother was brilliant at the domestic network, Dr. Chen said as our meeting wound down, but she always refused to expand internationally because she understood the risks. Now those risks are unavoidable. The people who need our help are facing threats that don't respect national boundaries. The decision to accept Dr. Chen's partnership wasn't made that night. We went home and spent 3 days agonizing over the implications. Kyle researched international law regarding identity fraud and document forgery. I investigated offshore banking regulations and money laundering statutes. Rebecca studied psychological literature about extreme identity transformation and its long-term effects. Meanwhile, David Park was running out of time. His handler at a federal witness protection program had been mysteriously reassigned, and 2 other potential whistleblowers in similar cases had died in apparent accidents within the past month.
"We can't save everyone," Kyle said during one of our debates, "but we might be able to save this one person, and that has to count for something." Rebecca made the decision that committed us to Dr. Chen's network. David Park gets a new face, a new name, a new country, and a new life. And if that means we become international criminals, then that's what we become.
The transformation process took 6 weeks and cost nearly $200,000 from the network's emergency funds. David underwent facial reconstruction surgery, dental work that changed his bite pattern, and minor cosmetic procedures that altered his overall appearance. Kyle coordinated with partners in New Zealand to establish a backstory for his new identity as a software consultant from Australia. I arranged financial transfers that would support him for 2 years while he established his new life. The psychological preparation was the most challenging aspect. Rebecca spent hours helping David process the grief of losing his former identity. He would never see his daughter again, never attend her wedding, never meet his grandchildren. For all practical purposes, David Park died in Dr. Chen's surgical suite, and someone entirely new emerged 6 weeks later. "The hardest part isn't the physical pain," David told Rebecca during his final session before departure. "It's learning to mourn yourself while you're still alive." His successful relocation to Wellington marked our entry into Dr. Chen's international network. Within a month, we received referrals from networks in Canada, Mexico, and 3 European countries. Each case involved people whose lives were threatened by forces too powerful for conventional law enforcement to challenge. But success brought scrutiny. Kyle noticed unusual vehicles parked near the house. I discovered someone had attempted to access our financial accounts. Rebecca received hang-up calls at odd hours. Dr. Chen warned us that expanding our operations had attracted attention from people who preferred the current system of unaccountable power. "This is the point where most people quit," she told us during a secure phone call, "when you realize that helping people escape injustice makes you enemies of the people perpetrating that injustice. Your grandmother understood this risk and chose to stay local. You're choosing to go global, which means you're choosing to paint targets on your backs." The threats became specific when Kyle found a note on his car windshield. "Some secrets are meant to stay buried. Some people are meant to disappear permanently. Consider this friendly advice." That evening, as we sat in Grandma's living room discussing whether to abandon the operation or increase security measures, Rebecca made an observation that changed our perspective entirely. "Grandma left us more than an inheritance," she said. "She left us a choice. We can live safely and comfortably, knowing that people like David Park die because we chose comfort over courage. Or we can accept that doing meaningful work makes us enemies of meaningless people." Kyle looked at the threatening note again. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we stop thinking like people who stumbled into this accidentally," Rebecca replied, "and start thinking like people who were chosen for this specifically. Grandma didn't leave everything to me because I deserved financial compensation. She left it to me because she knew I'd choose to use it for something important." The decision to fully commit to Dr. Chen's international network meant accepting that our old lives were over. Kyle couldn't return to supply chain management. I couldn't go back to small-town accounting. Rebecca couldn't pretend she'd ever been just a marketing coordinator from San Diego. We weren't Marcus, Kyle, and Rebecca Thompson anymore. We were operators in an underground network dedicated to protecting people whom legal systems had abandoned. And like everyone we helped disappear, we were about to learn what it meant to become someone entirely different. The hunters found us on a Tuesday morning in October, 6 months after we'd committed to Dr. Chen's international network. I was reviewing financial transfers for 3 pending cases when Kyle burst through the basement door, his face white with panic. "We need to evacuate, now. There are federal agents setting up surveillance across the street, and Dr. Chen just sent an emergency signal that her clinic is being raided." The emergency protocols we'd established suddenly became deadly serious. Rebecca was upstairs destroying paper files, while Kyle activated the digital purge sequence that would wipe all electronic records within 30 minutes.
I grabbed the emergency cash reserves and secure phones we'd prepared for exactly this scenario. But as we moved through our evacuation checklist, something felt wrong. The federal surveillance was too obvious, too visible. Real federal agents conducting a serious investigation wouldn't park conspicuously across the street from a target location. They'd use unmarked vehicles, distant observation points, sophisticated electronic monitoring. This isn't federal law enforcement, I told Kyle as we watched the supposed agents through the basement window. Look at their equipment, their positioning. These are private contractors trying to look like federal agents.
Rebecca joined us at the window. Dr. Chen's emergency signal was specific. Bluebird down means government raid. But what if she's wrong about who's raiding her? Kyle pulled out the encrypted tablet we used for secure communications and tried reaching our other network contacts. 3 different coordinators in 3 different cities reported similar raids happening simultaneously. The timing was too perfect for coincidence, but the execution was too sloppy for professional law enforcement. Someone's conducting a coordinated strike against the entire network, Kyle realized. But they're using private security firms instead of actual federal agencies. The implications were terrifying. Government raids meant arrest, prosecution, and prison. Private contractor raids meant something much worse: permanent disappearance, the kind of fate we'd been helping our clients avoid. Dr. Chen's voice crackled through our secure radio 15 minutes later. False alarm on government raid. These are corporate security teams. I recognize the leader. He works for Blackstone Industries, the defense contractor David Park was going to expose. They're not here to arrest us. They're here to eliminate us. The David Park case had apparently triggered a much larger response than we'd anticipated. His former company hadn't just wanted to silence him, they'd wanted to destroy the entire network that had helped him disappear. By making David Park vanish so completely, we'd proven that even their most sophisticated surveillance and tracking couldn't reach certain people. That made us a threat to their entire business model. How did they find all the network locations? Rebecca asked through the radio. Financial tracking, Dr. Chen replied. They followed money transfers between network nodes. These defense contractors have access to banking surveillance systems that rival government capabilities. They mapped our entire operation through transaction analysis. I felt sick. My carefully constructed financial security measures had been penetrated by people with resources I'd never imagined. Every anonymous account, every encrypted transfer, every offshore banking arrangement had left digital fingerprints that sophisticated analysts could follow. Kyle was already implementing our secondary evacuation plan. We can't stay here, and we can't contact other network members directly. Any communication will give them more tracking data. But abandoning our operation meant abandoning the 12 people currently in various stages of identity transformation. 3 clients were scheduled for document pickup this week. 2 others were waiting for surgical consultations with Dr. Chen. 7 more were in psychological preparation for complete identity changes. We can't just disappear and leave these people exposed, Rebecca said. Some of them will die if we don't complete their transformations. Dr. Chen's voice came through the radio again, calmer now. Emergency relocation protocol. Everyone to secondary sites immediately. Minimal communication, maximum mobility. We finish current cases through the backup network, then evaluate whether to rebuild or disperse permanently. The next 6 hours were the most stressful of my life. We evacuated Grandma's house through the storm drainage system Kyle had mapped months earlier as part of our security planning. Our emergency vehicles were parked 3 blocks away in a storage facility that couldn't be traced to any of our identities. By evening, we'd relocated to a cabin in the Cascade Mountains that Dr. Chen had prepared for exactly this scenario. The cabin was equipped with everything we needed to continue operations temporarily: secure communications, document production equipment, financial access terminals, and medical supplies for minor procedures. But it was also isolated enough that any assault would be visible from miles away. Over the next week, we learned the full scope of Blackstone Industries' operation against our network.
They'd simultaneously targeted 17 different cities, using corporate security teams and private investigators to conduct raids that appeared governmental but were actually industrial espionage operations. Their goal wasn't prosecution, it was complete elimination of anyone who could help corporate whistleblowers disappear. "We're not dealing with a single company anymore," Dr. Chen explained during a secure video conference. Blackstone Industries has coordinated with at least 6 other defense contractors, 3 pharmaceutical companies, and 2 oil corporations. They've essentially formed a private intelligence consortium dedicated to eliminating people who threaten corporate interests. The scope was breathtaking. We'd stumbled into a shadow war between corporate power and underground resistance networks. Our small operation helping domestic abuse victims had evolved into participation in a conflict that spanned multiple countries and involved billions of dollars in potential liability. But the corporate consortium had made a critical error. By targeting our entire network simultaneously, they'd revealed the full extent of their capabilities and resources. Dr. Chen had been collecting intelligence on corporate security operations for years, and the coordinated raids provided crucial data about their methods, personnel, and technical capabilities. "They showed us their hand," she said. "Now we can show them ours." Dr. Chen's counterattack was elegant and devastating. Instead of trying to rebuild our old network, we started a new one, specifically designed to target corporate whistleblowers and leaked information. Every client we helped was someone with inside knowledge of corporate corruption, environmental crimes, or human rights violations. "We're not just helping people escape anymore," Rebecca realized. "We're systematically dismantling corporate accountability by making their most dangerous employees disappear before they can be silenced permanently." The new network operated differently than Grandma's original vision. Instead of reactive assistance for people in immediate danger, we became proactive recruiters, identifying potential whistleblowers and offering them protection before their employers discovered their intentions. Kyle developed psychological profiles for employees most likely to expose corporate wrongdoing. I created financial incentives that made disappearing more attractive than staying silent. Rebecca specialized in helping people process the moral complexity of abandoning their careers to expose corruption. Within 3 months, we'd helped 37 corporate employees disappear after providing evidence of criminal activity to journalists, prosecutors, and regulatory agencies. The leaked information exposed environmental cover-ups, safety violations, illegal surveillance programs, and financial fraud totaling over $12 billion.
The corporate consortium's response was escalation. Instead of private security raids, they started using assassination attempts disguised as accidents. A former pharmaceutical researcher we'd relocated to Norway died in a suspicious car crash. An oil company engineer who'd exposed pipeline safety violations was found dead from an apparent heart attack, despite being 28 years old and in perfect health. "They're killing people we've already helped," Rebecca said, after we received confirmation of the 3rd suspicious death. "Even complete identity change isn't protecting them anymore." Dr. Chen's analysis was grimmer. "They're not trying to find our relocated clients to silence them. They're killing them to send a message to potential future whistleblowers. The message is that no level of protection can save you from corporate retaliation." That night, sitting in our mountain cabin while monitoring news reports about another suspicious death, I realized we'd reached a decision point that Grandma had never faced. Her network had operated in moral clarity, helping innocent victims escape dangerous situations. Our network had evolved into something much more complex: active warfare against institutions that considered themselves above accountability. "We can stop now," I told Kyle and Rebecca. "Dissolve the network, disperse to different countries, live quietly under new identities. Or we can accept that this has become something bigger than helping individual people. This has become about changing the system that creates the need for people to disappear in the first place." Rebecca looked at the photos of our relocated clients who'd been murdered despite our protection. "Grandma spent 30 years helping people escape injustice one case at a time. Maybe it's time to start eliminating injustice at its source." The decision to declare war on the corporate consortium was made that night in the mountains, with the weight of 37 successful cases and 7 confirmed murders pressing on our consciences.
We weren't running an underground railroad anymore. We were building a revolution. The revolution began with a single document that changed everything. 3 months after we'd committed to dismantling the corporate consortium, Kyle intercepted a classified memo during one of our intelligence gathering operations. The document, marked Project Clean Slate, outlined the consortium's ultimate plan, not just to eliminate existing whistleblower networks, but to create a surveillance system that would identify potential dissidents before they could access sensitive information. The memo detailed partnerships with social media companies, telecommunications providers, and government contractors to monitor employee communications, financial transactions, and personal relationships. Anyone showing signs of moral conflict about their work would be flagged for preemptive intervention, termination, blacklisting, or worse. They're not just trying to silence whistleblowers, Rebecca said as we reviewed the document. They're trying to create a system where whistleblowing becomes psychologically impossible, complete corporate immunity through total surveillance. Dr. Chen's response was immediate and decisive. This document needs to reach every major news outlet simultaneously, but more importantly, it needs to reach every employee at every company involved in Project Clean Slate. We're going to turn their own surveillance network against them. The operation Dr. Chen proposed was the largest coordinated leak in corporate history. Instead of helping individual whistleblowers disappear, we would simultaneously extract hundreds of employees from dozens of companies, each taking critical evidence of the surveillance program with them. Kyle's logistical analysis was staggering. We're talking about coordinating new identities for potentially 500 people across 12 countries. The financial requirements alone would exceed $10 million. But the funding sources were already in place. Over the past year, we'd built relationships with wealthy individuals whose own privacy had been violated by corporate surveillance. Tech entrepreneurs, civil rights attorneys, investigative journalists, and even some politicians had quietly supported our network's expansion. More importantly, I added, we've identified sympathetic employees within the consortium companies who are already documenting Project Clean Slate from the inside. They're not just willing to leak documents, they're actively sabotaging the surveillance systems they're supposed to be building. The internal sabotage was Rebecca's innovation. Instead of waiting for employees to contact us, she'd developed techniques for identifying and approaching people who were psychologically ready to rebel against their employers. Her success rate was remarkable. Nearly 70% of employees she contacted agreed to provide intelligence or active sabotage. People are desperate to do something meaningful with their lives, she explained. Most corporate employees spend their careers feeling complicit in systems they morally oppose. When you offer them a chance to fight back while protecting their safety, they jump at the opportunity. The mass extraction operation launched on a Tuesday in January, coordinated across 14 time zones to maximize confusion and minimize corporate response time. In a single day, 347 employees from 23 different companies disappeared with evidence documenting every aspect of Project Clean Slate. The leaked information revealed surveillance capabilities that exceeded most people's worst nightmares. Corporate consortium members had access to real-time monitoring of employee emails, text messages, phone calls, financial transactions, and even biometric data from office security systems. They could predict which employees were likely to become whistleblowers weeks before those employees had even decided to leak information.
But the most shocking revelation was the extent of government cooperation. Project Clean Slate wasn't just a corporate surveillance program, it was a beta test for national surveillance infrastructure that would eventually monitor all citizens for signs of subversive thinking. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Protests erupted outside every company headquarters. Congressional investigations were launched within 48 hours. European regulators imposed billions in fines for privacy violations. Stock prices collapsed for every consortium member. More importantly, the leaked surveillance data included detailed files on politicians, judges, and law enforcement officials. The consortium had been monitoring government employees just as extensively as their own workers, creating blackmail material that explained decades of regulatory capture and judicial favoritism. They overreached, Dr. Chen observed as we watched news coverage of the consortium's collapse.
By surveilling everyone, they created enemies of everyone. Politicians who might have protected them discovered they were being monitored and blackmailed. Within 6 months, every major company involved in Project Clean Slate faced criminal investigations, massive lawsuits, and regulatory dismantling. Blackstone Industries was liquidated entirely, its assets distributed to victims of corporate surveillance. 3 other consortium members filed bankruptcy. The remaining companies survived only by completely restructuring their operations and accepting permanent government oversight. But our victory came with personal costs that none of us had anticipated. The mass extraction operation had made us too visible, too successful, too dangerous to ignore. Government agencies that had initially viewed us as a minor law enforcement problem now recognized us as a significant national security threat, not because we were criminals, but because we'd proven that organized resistance could successfully challenge corporate power. We can't go back to being Marcus, Kyle, and Rebecca Thompson, I told my siblings as we prepared for our own disappearance. Those identities are burned. Law enforcement in 12 countries has our faces, our fingerprints, our DNA profiles. We've become the kind of people we used to help. Dr. Chen had prepared final identities for all 3 of us, but accepting them meant permanent separation from each other and from any remaining connections to our former lives. The price of dismantling the surveillance consortium was becoming permanent refugees from the system we'd fought. Rebecca's decision surprised me. "I'm not disappearing," she announced. "I'm going public." Her plan was audacious and terrifying. Instead of accepting a new identity and vanishing into the underground network, she wanted to become the public face of resistance to corporate surveillance. She would testify before Congress, write a book about our experiences, and establish a legitimate organization dedicated to protecting whistleblowers. "Someone needs to make the case that what we did was necessary and right," she argued. "If we all disappear, the narrative becomes that we were criminals who got away with it. If I stay and face prosecution, the narrative becomes that we were patriots who sacrificed everything to protect democracy." Kyle and I chose different paths. Kyle accepted Dr. Chen's offer to relocate to New Zealand, where he would help establish a legitimate privacy rights organization using skills he'd developed during our underground years. His new identity would allow him to work openly while maintaining separation from his Thompson family past. I decided to stay in the United States under a new identity, continuing to provide financial support for whistleblower networks while maintaining enough distance to avoid direct legal exposure. My accounting skills would help fund the next generation of resistance operations. Dr. Chen's network dispersed into dozens of smaller, more specialized operations. The mass extraction success had proven that coordinated resistance could achieve systemic change, but it had also attracted too much attention for centralized operations to continue safely. Rebecca's public testimony before Congress lasted 3 days and was broadcast live around the world. She described our grandmother's original mission, our discovery of the basement workshop, our evolution into international operators, and our final decision to dismantle Project Clean Slate through mass extraction. Her closing statement became a rallying cry for privacy rights activists worldwide. My grandmother taught me that sometimes mercy requires breaking a few rules. What we learned is that sometimes democracy requires a lot of rules. The choice isn't between legal and illegal, it's between right and wrong. Rebecca was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for conspiracy and document fraud. She served 18 months before being released early due to public pressure and congressional intervention. Her book, The Basement Network, became an international bestseller and inspired similar resistance movements in 17 countries. Kyle's privacy rights organization in New Zealand successfully lobbied for constitutional amendments protecting whistleblower rights and limiting corporate surveillance. His work influenced similar legislation across the Pacific region, creating legal frameworks that made our underground network unnecessary in many situations. I continued operating financial support networks for whistleblower protection, but through legitimate channels wherever possible. The success of our mass extraction operation had created political space for legal alternatives to underground resistance. 5 years after discovering Grandma's basement workshop, the three of us reunited for the first time at Eleanor Thompson's grave. We were different people with different names, different histories, different futures. But we were still family, and we were still committed to the principle that had guided Grandma's work for 30 years. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is help someone disappear. The inscription we added to Grandma's headstone read simply, "She taught us that love sometimes looks like letting go." As we stood at her grave, I realized that Grandma's true inheritance wasn't the money or the house or even the basement workshop. It was the understanding that ordinary people have extraordinary power to protect each other when legal systems fail. Rebecca had found her way back to her original name and identity, but on her own terms. Kyle had built something lasting and legitimate from skills learned in darkness. I had learned that some kinds of work require permanent invisibility, and that anonymity could be its own form of service. We'd started as 3 people shocked by an unexpected inheritance. We'd become 3 people who understood that the most valuable things you can inherit are principles worth risking everything to defend. The basement workshop was gone, demolished when the house was sold. But the network it had spawned continued in dozens of countries, protecting thousands of people who needed to disappear, to change, to become someone new in order to survive. And sometimes, late at night, I think about Grandma's letter to Rebecca. Sometimes, mercy requires breaking a few rules. She was wrong about one thing. Sometimes, mercy requires breaking every rule that stands between vulnerable people and safety. That's a lesson worth inheriting. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.